Hi, my name is Lindsay Russell, and I decided to research why Jane Austen is still so popular nearly 200 years after her death. This is just a guide to my presentation, and you can take a look at it a little bit later. So I started with the research question, why does Jane Austen's life and work still inspire today? Before I started, I just wanted to state a hypothesis and also state the seemingly obvious assumption that I made before I started is that Jane Austen does still influence popular culture. If I didn't have that assumption, this would have been a completely different project. My hypothesis states that Jane Austen's work is still influential today due to the quality of her writing and her timeless descriptions of human nature. This is just a little bit of background on Jane Austen's life. She was the daughter of a Anglican minister. She grew up with several brothers and her sister Cassandra, who was her best friend. She died an untimely death, probably from Addison's disease, although they're not exactly sure. Two of her novels, Northanger Abbey and Persuasion, were published posthumously. And upon her death, her brother and sister let the world know that, yes, indeed, she was the author of these novels. Prior to that, it was very unseemly for women to be writers. Most women were not well educated at all. Upon her father's death, she and her mother went to go live on her brother Edward's estate in Chawton, where most of her work was done. At the time, women who were not married or widowed really didn't have a lot of options. They had to rely on family. And if you're familiar with Jane Austen's work, much of her work dealt with that reality. Also, she's heavily associated with Bath, which was considered a lot of the influence for characters in her novels. She's also the last person buried in Winchester Cathedral. This is just an overview of her major work. My research and projects focus mainly on her 6 novels. This is an overview of some of the more well-known adaptations of her novels and presentations of her novels in the last 20-some years. Included Bridget Jones' Diary, which was not only a series of books and movies, it started life as a series of 3 newspaper columns. The third one had yet to be published by book or made into a movie. Clueless was a very influential movie at the time and is loosely based on Emma. Then in more recently, you have Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, which seeks to just capitalize on the whole genre and popularity of zombies. It's actually not a bad book. And interestingly, a very famous British mystery writer, P.D. James, who just passed away, wrote Death Comes to Pemberley, and it actually serves as a sequel to Pride and Prejudice. Unfortunately, Jane Austen was only 41 when she passed away, so she never really wrote any sequels to her books. Also, you have the repackaging and explanation of Jane Austen's life and work. A case could be made that the entire popularity of Jane Austen goes back to a series of films and miniseries that were produced by the BBC in the mid-90s. They were very successful and very popular. You also have a book that was published last year that tries to make the case that Jane Austen was a strategist. It's a very interesting book, and if you look at my Pinterest board, you'll see that not everybody agrees with that theory at all. And there's a lot of speculation about it. And then finally, you have the real life Jane Austen, A Life in Small Things, which discusses her real life. This is just two of the more popular movies that were adaptations of her most famous novels, Pride and Prejudice and Emma. This video clip is actually the most famous scene out of all of the film adaptations of Pride and Prejudice. Colin Firth, who went on to play Mr. Darcy in Bridget Jones' Diary, is playing Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy in the movie version of Pride and Prejudice. And many people just feel that this scene is what made him into a sex symbol and kind of kicked off the entire interest in Jane Austen. See what you think. These 21st century adaptations, to me, reflect a lot more variety than what you saw in the mid-90s. The mid-90s, you had films and movies that people thought were geared more towards women and girls and really tried to fit into specific genres like chick flick. What you have today, especially with things like Pride and Prejudice and Zombies and Jane Austen Game Theorists, and even Death Comes to Pemberley, authors are trying to appeal to a wider audience. So now we get to what I found in the research. And one of the first articles I came across states that in our society, since we've done away with most gender norms, our fascination with Jane Austen's work is that all of that wonderful description of highly prescribed gender roles during this time. The article's not trying to argue that we need to go back to that, but it's just stating that it may be a longing to have some kind of roadmap on how we're supposed to behave in society. It also states her writing style and universal themes as why her work continues to be popular. This next video is perhaps the most definitive video I found that describes what I feel to be the reasons why she is so popular. The video goes on to state that not only was she a keen observer of human nature, many of her characters had integrity, self-awareness when making some gut-wrenching decisions. You can see that throughout all of her novels. Also, her novels were great at describing the foibles and warts of human nature, and it was put to good use for humorous effect. Also, her characters in her novels grow. For example, Mr. Darcy at the beginning of the novel Pride and Prejudice is not the same Mr. Darcy that you have at the end of the book. Also, the author makes a case that we are intrigued by social limitations of that time period, not just for women in that society, but everyone because of the social classes that were in place. I also came across some research stating that Jane Austen novels allow us to reflect on our own place in life, and we can see a lot of ourselves in her texts, and we can reflect that back in various ways. So, to me, she was saying that was kind of the basis for her reinterpretation and why we have so many reinventions and sequels and why her novels are still so popular. Now, this next video is a little bit different. This speaker is arguing that Jane Austen is highly misunderstood and misread and often relegated to a teenage romance novel. And she says that's due to her Victorian image when really Jane Austen was more of the Regency period. The author goes on to state that it's better to lose yourself in a fictional world than to try to have to learn something from a novel necessarily. She also states that Jane Austen's blunt, at times, discussion of human nature is why she's still so popular. And also, Jane Austen didn't have to explain the class stratification to her audience, which that really helped with her come across as witty. So these were some themes that I found across all of my research. It includes Jane Austen's universal themes, observations on timeless human nature, keen social observations, the growth of her characters, her open-ended plots that allowed for a sequel, allowed for a reinterpretation, and her humor. So my conclusion is that I agree with much of what I found, but I also felt that there were things that I thought I would come across that I didn't. Personally, I think that Jane Austen's heroines are more fully developed than, let's say, Bridget Jones, and I wanted to find out why. I found research that hinted at that, but never really came out and said that. Also, I wanted a better explanation on why Jane Austen appealed to modern women, and those are my thoughts and ideas. I also created an infographic, timeline, and Pinterest board, which I will include links to those when I post this presentation. So thank you, and here's my bibliography at the end. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did putting this together. I had a lot of fun with this. And again, this is something that I've wanted to know for some time. Thank you.